So I just saw Superman, and I have thoughts on it, and I wanted to share them here because that's kind of what I do. Maybe it's what I do now. I don't know. I wanted to shave for this video because it really annoyed me that I was like all stubbly in the last one. But like the cack-handed fool that I am, I've managed to cut myself shaving, so I didn't want to wait. So I'm 24. I grew up in the 2000s, and during this time, there wasn't a whole lot of Superman. Superman was kind of absent. He had his time in the 70s, 80s, and I think the 90s as well, and the 2000s were kind of a bit of a black hole for Superman. You had amazing, Spider-Man representation, Batman, the Marvel Cinematic Universe eventually came along, and look at where we are now. We're living in a MCU created universe. But no real Superman representation. They did like a kind of semi-sequel thing to the original Christopher Reeve Superman movies in like the mid-2000s. I remember that coming out. I did have a Superman toy. I remember very vividly. He was like a larger scale one, and he had like a little button, and I think it probably made him do the this flying thing. I remember that. So there's a little bit of Superman. Watched Superman 1 and 2 with my granddad occasionally. I kind of have memories of it, vivid memories of scenes. I always remember him falling into the pool with the kryptonite around his neck, but I haven't properly sat down and watched those movies in probably almost like 20 years. So all of that is to say I'm not really like a big Superman fan. Like I don't have any connection with Superman. I think there were some TV shows or something in the 90s and the 2000s, but I never watched any of those, so I have no connection to this character. The reason I wanted to see this movie is because it looked like a fresh take on the character that was, well, I say a fresh take, it was more like it was going back to how Superman should be, or how he was originally conceived, and how we kind of knew him in pop culture before Man of Steel came along and kind of ruined the whole thing. And in general, I just want to support that change. I want to support a more vibrant, colourful, optimistic Superman movie and superhero movies in general. I have a nostalgia for those types of movies, like the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans. I have a nostalgia for the kind of plucky, I'm a superhero and everything's colourful and optimistic and we're going to stop the bad guys. And in terms of delivering on that promise of optimism and hopeful stuff and kind of campy, vibrant fun, this movie does deliver that. If that's what you're here for, if that's what you want, you will get that. And I do not regret seeing it. I liked the movie overall. I think it succeeded, and I definitely want to see more of this type of movie, and I think it's a great direction for the DC universe to go in. I'm looking forward to seeing what James Gunn and the rest of the DC universe has in store for us in the future. With all of that being said, I did not love the movie, and I had a lot of problems with it, and that's kind of more what I want to talk about. Spoilers, by the way. I always forget to say spoilers, but yeah, spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, I probably will spoil things. There are details in the movie that I will need to elaborate on to describe the problems that I had with the movie. All of the individual elements of this movie worked for me in a vacuum. They all work individually, but I feel like together in this movie, it doesn't quite all come together, and there's a lot of what I would consider to be wasted time or wasted potential. This movie is called Superman. It's not called Superman and the Justice Gang, it's Superman. And when I come to see a Superman movie, I would quite like to see a Superman movie and not a sort of proto-Justice League type of thing. It's become just a common trend now that every superhero movie has to have multiple heroes in it, and I think that kind of started in like the 2010s when, we'd done all the standalone movies, and then the Avengers comes along and kind of sets a new precedent, and like people now want to see a superhero movie that kind of crosses over with lots of other heroes, and you have lots of heroes in one movie. But I think that was the natural progression of the comic books, is that all the characters were individual, and then eventually once that started running a bit stale, they decided to do mashups and to cross over with each other and to form gangs, the Justice League and the Avengers and all that stuff. And it feels like that's kind of where we're at now in superhero movies, is that the same progression has happened where we've done all the individual superhero movies, they've all had their own franchises and movies where it's just them, and now people are open to the idea of, multiverses and multiple heroes existing in the same universe, and we're all kind of comfortable with that now. And that's fine for certain movies, but I think it's still okay to have your individual movies with their individual continuity, with their individual superheroes. It kind of makes the heroes feel less important or less significant when there's multiple of them. I mean, Superman in this movie doesn't feel as special because there's a bunch of other meta-humans and superheroes who are also there and helping him out in situations. And part of me, a large part of me was just I kind of just want to see a Superman movie. Am I the only one who kind of wants that now? Am I too old school? Am I thinking too fondly of, the Spider-Man movies and the Batman movies where everything just had its own continuity and different timelines, and, you could have a Superman movie and a Batman movie and there was no talk of crossing them over, there was no talk of them existing in the same universe. It's a Superman movie, it's a Batman movie. But now it's you got Hawk Girl and Green Lantern and Mr. Terrific and that other guy who could transform into loads of things. And as I say, all of these elements are fine in and of themselves. James Gunn really excels at team movies. He really excels at creating interesting dynamics between crazy characters, and he loves his teams and he loves his obscure superheroes. And that works for something like Suicide Squad, where it's a team of wacky individuals, or Guardians of the Galaxy, which is also a team of wacky individuals. But when it comes to Superman, I always think about Superman as just being a standalone guy. It's him, Lois Lane, Clark Kent, and, Lex Luthor comes along and wants to steal a diamond or something. I don't know. And I'm not saying that this is wrong, and I'm not saying that this is bad, and I'm not saying it inherently bad, but I think it's just a personal taste thing, really. I wanted to see a Superman movie. I liked all the individual characters. As I say, on their own, I found them to be entertaining and interesting. Mr. Terrific was cool. They all had a nice chemistry with one another. They were fun to watch. But I personally found myself constantly thinking whenever we were with them for any extended period of time, and there is quite an extended period of time in the middle of the movie where Superman is captured, and we spend a long time with these other characters, and I just kept thinking, Lois Lane goes on this little adventure with Mr. Terrific, and I'm like, why couldn't we have done this with Superman? Maybe someone else gets captured and Superman has to save them or something. Why are we, Superman and Lois don't actually have a whole lot of screen time together in this movie. They kind of just do a broad strokes thing in this movie quite a lot. It felt like they were just kind of painting the character in very broad strokes. Lois and Clark's relationship, it's just, they have, in my memory, it's 2 scenes of them just in a living room together, and they're just in their apartment and they just have a chat, and you don't really get to see them I don't know, go on a date or something, or go and do something interesting. They're just in the apartment together, just talking. It felt like a missed opportunity where this is a Superman movie and it should be focused on Superman and his relationship with Lois Lane and his relationship with the rest of the world and him being a superhero. And I'm not saying that isn't in there, but it's kind of overshadowed and overcrowded with other characters and other bits and pieces and, plots and monsters and all that stuff. Like how I said plot, as if the plot's not important. Of course the plot is important. That's fine. There was just a lot of there was a lot of elements in this movie, and a lot of them to me felt like they were distracting from the core element of this being a Superman movie. It felt more like James Gunn wanted to just make another wacky team-up movie. It feels like that's where his focus was as a writer and a director, was more on these side characters than it was on the actual main character, and that was one of my biggest problems with it. Maybe I'm just too old school, you know, maybe I need to just get with the times, bro, and superhero movies are just like this now, and they just have lots of superheroes in them, and you just have to accept that. But personally for me, not quite what I wanted. Maybe I should just go and watch the Richard Donner Superman movies. I probably will. I have an interest in checking them out and seeing if they connect with me more than this. Or maybe if I would appreciate this maybe I would then appreciate this movie for doing something a bit different. But as it stands, I liked all the extra characters, but I did find that they were taking up more screen time than personally I would want. That leads me into my biggest critique with the movie, and this is kind of what all of my other complaints will hang off of this one singular complaint, is that I don't like where the movie starts. The movie starts midway through the action. It's been 3 years since Superman has revealed himself, and he's been Superman for 3 years, and it starts with him getting... Well, you see him get beaten, but you see the aftermath of him being beaten by this supervillain for the first time, and the first time he's ever been beaten, apparently. And he gets whisked away to the Fortress of Solitude and heals himself and all this. Then he comes back to the fray, and before the opening titles have even dropped, you know, you're getting thrown all of this kind of excitement, and you feel like you're in the middle of a story that has already been going. And I know that was probably the creative decision behind it. My girlfriend said that James Gunn wanted it to feel like you had just picked up a random issue of a comic book and just started flipping through it, with the continuity beforehand not really being elaborated on too much. Personally, I find this to be a very frustrating way to tell a story. You don't see the initial incidents that the rest of the plot hangs on. One of the major plot points in the movie is that Superman went to a foreign country that was marching on another country, was going to invade, and he stops this invasion from happening, saves people's lives, and that is like a huge plot point in the movie, and a huge thread throughout the film, and ultimately the climax of the movie. And you never get to see that initial moment. You never get to see Lex Luthor's, I don't want to say origin, but you don't get like a proper sense of really why he properly hates Superman. And maybe he has a couple throwaway lines where he says he doesn't like him because he's an alien and blah 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 blah, and he's a fairly basic character anyway. And yes, we already know, the audience already knows these characters, so they feel as though they don't need to elaborate too much on them. But frankly, I don't necessarily need to see Superman's like origin story again. I don't need to see him like on Krypton, you know, or being flown to Earth. I don't need to see that. But it would have been nice if I could have seen like Lex Luthor and Superman's dynamic maybe develop over the course of the film, like the initial spark that made Lex Luthor hate Superman. When was it that Lex Luthor noticed Superman and went, I don't like this guy offends me, and I want to kill him? We don't get to see Lois and Clark's first encounter. When we see them, they've been dating for a few months already. We never get to see that initial interaction between the two of them. Clark Kent's already at the Daily Planet. You don't get to see a whole lot of like normal, average Clark Kent, because this universe is also not particularly normal. You know, there's aliens and superheroes like flying around doing shit like 24/7. I feel like superhero movies, especially ones like Superman, they work if the world that they are in is more grounded and more realistic. When you have a character like Superman in a universe where there's just loads of superheroes and big monsters and interdimensional wormholes and, you know, alternate universes, pocket universes and all this stuff, it kind of makes him less special and makes him stand out less in a world that is ultimately very crazy. Whereas Superman as an image works really well when he's just walking around like a normal city. When he is the only extraordinary element in the universe, he really stands out as a character. But I really did have a problem with the movie starting where it did, because it felt like I was missing like a first act. It felt like I just dropped in to a movie that was already halfway going, Another element that like speaks to that is this character whose name I've forgotten, but he's like a civilian. He helps Superman at the beginning of the movie. He later gets killed by Lex Luthor in front of Superman, and it's supposed to be this big emotional moment. When he helps Superman out of a hole at the beginning of the movie after he's like been fighting this guy for a bit. You've probably seen it in the trailer. And while he's doing so, this is right at the beginning of the movie, he's like, "Oh, I served you food one time, Superman. Like, you're a cool guy, let me help you." And it's like, do you want to show me the beginning of any of these characters and their development? Because would it have not have served the plot and the emotional weight of this random character's death if I had actually seen Superman's initial interaction with him, like a cute scene where he, goes and buys food off this vendor or something, and then he saves him, helps him up off the ground later in the movie, and then later in the movie, Lex Luthor kills him, and I, as an audience member, feel sad because I've witnessed this character and his relationship with Superman kind of grow throughout the course of the movie. But they just skip over the beginning of basically every element that is fundamental to the character of Superman and that is fundamental for the plot to work. I don't necessarily agree with the idea that we don't need to see an origin story, because we already know it already. I don't agree with the idea that origin stories are just, it's just faff. It's just, we already know it, we don't need it. What's important is Superman just going around and saving people. To me, the origin story is such an important part of a superhero's, journey. It's such an important part of who they are, and there's so much interesting stuff that you can do there, and I feel like it's just, frankly, a bit lazy to not bother doing that. Don't necessarily need to see him falling to earth, but would it have killed you to at least have maybe shown me him and Lois's relationship from the very beginning, or just something from the beginning would have been nice. I did definitely like the third act the best when there is actually a conflict and it's like Superman has to save Metropolis, or he has to decide whether he wants to save Metropolis or he wants to go and stop this war and stop all these innocent people from dying. That was a good conflict, and that made me go, ooh, I wonder what's going to happen here, I wonder what he's going to do. Ultimately, there's no real mystery there because we already have the other superheroes and we've already established them, and I immediately just thought, he's going to go and stop, save Metropolis, and he'll just get his friends to go and deal with the other problem, and that's exactly what happened. So I felt like maybe that, if he had been the only superhero in the movie, that would have been a really great conflict. Superman has to decide whether he wants to save Metropolis or go and save these people that are going to get killed in this war, and they're happening at the same time. What's he going to do? We know what he's going to do. He's just going to get his superhero friends to go and deal with one thing, and he'll go deal with the other. Also, everyone in Metropolis just doesn't... They don't seem to give a single flying fuck about the giant monsters that are constantly trying to kill them. On the one hand, I think they are doing some commentary, some lovely little commentary, about how we as a society are so desensitized to destructive events, and we see them on the news every 5 seconds, and we're just we ignore them, we're apathetic to things that are happening. Not usually things that are happening in your own city, that must be said, but I feel like they were intentionally pointing out the fact that Metropolis gets attacked every week, and they're just they're over it at this point, they don't even care. There's multiple points where people in the Daily Planet are just having a chat while on the screens behind them on the TVs there's giant monster attacking Metropolis, and it's okay, I feel like you obviously you're commenting on something there, and that's fine. That also doesn't help to make the stakes feel particularly high when the characters in the movie don't seem to give a shit about the world-ending disasters. But it was more the fact that there were people in the street right next to the giant monsters that didn't seem to even notice that the monsters were there, which didn't seem like it was commenting on anything. It just seemed stupid. You'll see it in the trailer. There's a girl who almost gets squashed by this monster. She's literally facing the other way, just kicking her feet. It's love, look behind you. There is a giant monster. It's going to kill you. So that felt a bit weird. The plot just kind of basically insists that this third act Metropolis destroying event, this is the one that you actually need to care about, and all the other ones were just, they're whatever. Just helps for the audience to actually feel any sort of stakes when Superman is like fighting a villain, and there were no real stakes for me up until the third act. That's when there was a bit more of a consequence to Superman fighting the villains, because all the way up until that point there were no real consequences, or none that I felt anyway. I have a few other kind of minor complaints, like some of the humour felt a little bit overdone. There were a couple of bits of humour that felt unnecessary or out of place, but that's kind of par for the course for this type of movie, really. It's like, 90% of the jokes work for me, 10% don't. Whatever. Most of the humour was pretty good. There were some good lines, and I was smiling at quite a few moments. So some weird perspective shots. I've got one here. Lots of kind of wide-angle lenses close to people's faces, and it just did look a bit silly at times. A lot of the flying sequences didn't really work for me, and I feel like we've seen better in other movies, but overall I thought it was visually distinct. Lots of nice shots and nice colours, and at least it was visually communicating something. I'd much rather have something like this that maybe looks a bit silly from time to time than have something that's just like a locked off camera, like a Marvel movie, like we're shooting this all on a green screen and it looks like we're shooting it on a green screen sort of thing. Visually, this movie is miles better than the vast majority of the MCU movies. I'm also very much looking forward to the Supergirl movie. I was intrigued by it when they announced it, because from my understanding there's only ever been like one other Supergirl movie, and it's absolutely panned and is like supposedly one of the worst superhero movies ever made. So that intrigued me more than Superman, because we've seen Superman before, but a good Supergirl adaptation, that would be interesting. And she shows up at the end of this movie for a little bit, and that was probably my favourite part of the movie, because she was completely not what I was expecting. She comes in fucking drunk with like a big overcoat on. Superman's been looking after a dog the whole movie, and she's like, thanks for looking after my dog, bitch, and then she just fucking leaves. It's great. She's like this unruly, like, drunken, like, party girl. That was cool. That was intriguing. That was not what I was expecting them to do, and I am looking forward to her movie more now than I was before, and I was already interested in it, so that's cool. Ultimately, I am looking forward to seeing where the rest of the movies go. I just wish that he had maybe just taken a step back and had a bit more restraint in terms of how he handled some of those extra characters, and maybe just focused on Superman just for this movie. Add all the silly characters you want in the sequels, once you've already established Superman, fine. But I feel like he went kind of in at the deep end and just threw a lot of stuff in there because he wanted to. And I feel like the movie would have been best served if it had taken a step back, maybe made things a little more simple, and just given us a bit more groundwork for Superman as a character. Would have loved to have seen a proper first act, and really gotten to know these characters before you threw them into the plot, before you threw me into the plot properly. But overall, it was enjoyable, and I liked it. And it was positive, and it was colourful, and I think ultimately that is what I wanted, and I don't regret seeing it, and I'm happy to have supported it, and I'm happy that it's doing well, and I'm happy that people really like it, because I want to see more of this. I do want to see more of this. It just didn't quite click with me overall, but it was a fun movie, and hopefully it'll grow on me in time, and hopefully the sequels will be good, and I am interested to see what else they have in store, what they have planned. Looking forward to that Supergirl movie. So yeah, I would say it was successful.